All right, take your Bible tonight. Go to Nehemiah chapter 5, please. And Nehemiah chapter 5 tonight, we're gonna finish a whole chapter of the Bible in one night, which I am confident has never happened before. But Nehemiah 5, first of all, our study through Nehemiah really isn't a deep expository verse-by-verse study. We're trying to get principles that apply to us with our theme to fight on. And Nehemiah chapter 5 is just an interesting chapter. It really all centers around usury, loaning, money, taxes, Nehemiah's choice to remove himself from that system. And there's a couple of nuggets I think we'll pick up along the way. So probably one of the least intense midweek services. I generally say that midweek Bible study is no holds barred. Don't invite guests to Thursday night because we might, you know that for sure, right? You've done that before. You made the mistake, right? And they leave. What was that all about? He was mean. He said things I don't like. Oh, wow. Why do you my safe space? Oh. But anyway, tonight will be, other than being relatively politically incorrect in some cases, will be pretty light. But we're going to be talking about the name of the sermon's probably the most punchy thing we'll have tonight. I called it Jews, Banks, Taxes, and Fraud. Just because I had to find something to call this sermon, and that's what we're going to be talking about: Jews, banks, taxes, and fraud. And so it reminds me of a story of a couple that was going through a difficult divorce. And while the lady was cleaning out the attic of her dream home that she was getting ready to sell, a genie pops out, and the genie says, "I'm going to grant you 3 wishes. Anything that you want, I will grant you. Just know this, that whatever you ask for, I'm going to give double to your ex-husband." And so she's there in her dream home, and she said, "Well, I'm losing my dream home, so the first thing I wish for is a beautiful, huge mansion, complete with a staff to serve my every whim." The genie snaps his fingers and says, "Done. You are now the owner of the most luxurious mansions in the whole state. You'll have the greatest staff who will wait on you hand and foot, and certainly everything will be wonderful. Just remember, now your ex-husband is the owner of 2 wonderful mansions with 2 great staffs, one home for the winter and one home for the summer." So she's thinking about her second wish. She says, "Well, you know what? I've got this huge mansion and staff. There's going to be taxes, which we're going to talk about tonight. There's going to be maintenance. There's going to be bills. So I better get some cash flow going here." So she said, "I wish for $500 million. The genie snaps his fingers and says, "Your bank account now has been debited $500 million. Just remember that your ex-husband now has a bank account with $1 billion. And so she's got this third wish, and she feels the pressure for that, and she starts pacing the attic back and forth. Finally, a light gleams in her eyes, and she said, "I have my third wish." The genie said, "What is your third wish?" And she said, "I want you to scare me half to death." Those of you that failed math, half times 2 is 1, and if you're 1 dead, that means you're totally dead, okay? She killed her husband. That's what the whole joke is, okay? In Nehemiah chapter 1, we find out that Nehemiah learns of the broken condition of Jerusalem. The walls, which God designed to keep the bad stuff out, are broken down. The gates, which are pictures of discernment to let good things in, are burned out. And Nehemiah determines to do something about it. And in chapter 2, he has his day in the king's court so that he is now equipped to do something about it. And then he has his prosperous trip to Jerusalem. And if you flip back quickly to Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 17 and 18 is our text for the whole study. And when he lays out the opportunity to the people, they have the right response. Nehemiah 2:17, "Then said I unto them, You see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. In Nehemiah chapter 3, we saw what seemed to be a boring engineer's report on the construction and the delegation of the tasks. Really was a record of the 12 gates that were rebuilt, which are a picture of the Christian life and Christian growth. In Nehemiah chapter 4, we saw that the opposition was going to dig in. We saw the imperative of knowing your enemies, having a mind to work, understanding the grand conspiracy, the need to battle and build at the same time. And then last week, or 2 weeks ago, we saw the need for assembly, which brings us here to Nehemiah and chapter 5. Starting in verse 1, the Bible says, and there was a great cry of the people and of the wives against their brethren the Jews. For there were that said, we, our sons, and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn because of the dearth. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tributes, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought into bondage already, neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. Nehemiah's response to this in verse 6, and I was very angry when I heard their cry and these words. Then I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, ye exact usury, every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, we after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. And will ye even sell your brethren, or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace, and found nothing to answer. Found nothing to answer. So here we have a record of God's people in a great trial, in a great need. So what we had left with chapter 4 is the enemies of God's people had created a blockade in modern terms, and the blockade had created a famine. And the famine had caused a great problem. And what we see here, actually, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty tonight, and again, we're not going to get really deep into doctrine or anything terribly probably pungent tonight. But what we see is how God's people can react poorly in bad circumstances. And also going to look at the prophetic angle that what we're seeing here in Nehemiah chapter 5 plays in our day. And as I said, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty talking about the Jews, the banks, the taxes, and the fraud. And it reminds me of a blonde woman who walked into a bank in New York City, and she was going to go on vacation, so she asked for a $5,000 loan. And the banker replied, just like we have here, what do you need to have a mortgage or a loan? You need collateral, right? And so the banker said, well, what are you going to use as collateral for this loan? And she said, well, I would like to use my Rolls-Royce car. The guy was a little bit suspicious of that. He said, so you're going to use a $250,000 Rolls-Royce as collateral for a $5,000 loan? And she said, yeah, I'm going on vacation and I don't need it, so I'd like to use that car as collateral. Well, he was suspicious anyway, did all the checking and found out that it was a legitimate offer. He was the owner of a Rolls-Royce, and so clearly the bank was willing to do the transaction. They gave her the $5,000 loan. She left, and 2 weeks later she came back. She paid off the $5,000 loan along with the $15.41 in interest. And the loan officer said, ma'am, I've got to ask you a question. While you were gone, we checked out who you were. We found out that you were a multi-millionaire. Why is it that you felt like you needed a $5,000 loan to go on vacation? And she said, well, where else could I park in New York City for $15.14 for 2 weeks and expect my car to be there when I returned? I knew that you'd keep my car safe. There's a rare example of someone getting over on a bank, and that's how we know that it's just a joke. Because I used to work for banks, and the bank always wins. Okay, that's the way it's set up. So here we have the blockade. It's having its effect. The people are in deep poverty, And remember this, the people are in deep poverty. They're starving to death, which we can't even relate to. We don't understand that, and thank God that we can't understand that. But they're starving to death because they're doing right. They're serving God. And they're surrounded there. And by the way, I want us to kind of make some prophetic applications. They're surrounded in Nehemiah's day, just like the Jews are surrounded today. Today you have roughly 4.5, 5 million Jews surrounded by 40 to 50 million Muslims around them. And never forget, no matter what soft ecumenical niceties the preparatory governments to the Antichrist pluralistic kingdom is putting on things, the Muslim faith still believes that it is not only okay, but it is your duty as a Muslim to find and to kill the enemies of Allah, chief of which are the Jews and the followers of Jesus. And so even though there is some lipstick and rouge on the beast, never forget that when she smiles, there are fangs that are glistening with the blood of the people that they kill. And by the way, that's even more true for Rome. Rome is the great conspirator behind all of this. So if you look at verse number 2, here's what's happening. The people are stealing so that they can eat. They're stealing so their kids can eat. Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 30 says, "Men do not despise a thief if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry. But if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house." And that reminds me of a simple truth that we've been studying a little bit in Sunday school. We talked about ignorance is no excuse. Empathy is also no excuse. So even if somebody's sinning and you in your own mind can justify that and say, I understand that, and if I was in the same situation, I probably would do the same thing. Let's never forget that it's never right to do wrong, even if you're trying to do right. Okay? Now that's easy for us to say. It's easy for us to say when all of us know that one way or another, we're all going to be fed, and we're all going to be fed well above what our subsistence needs are. And in fact, for most of us, we're struggling not to get enough food. We're struggling to not eat too much food. And so it's difficult for us to understand this. We can't enter into this line of thinking. But remember that what we're seeing here, while in our minds justified, and while we're not going to be the first people to call out for vengeance on people that are doing this, in God's sight, is still wrong. In verse number 3, they're mortgaging their assets in order to eat. So here we have people stealing for food. We have people mortgaging their assets to other people of their same nation to food to eat. And obviously, as you're reading this text, you say, insert Jew joke between verses 3 and 4. That's just kind of, the text calls out for it. So I will. Did you hear about the Jewish businessman whose daughter got married to a fine young man? The businessman had a meeting with his new son-in-law, and he said, I love my daughter very much. I don't know if that's a good Jewish accent or not, but just substitute for one. And now I want to welcome you to the family. So I'm going to make you full partner in my business. I'm going to forget the accent because I don't know where I'm going with that. My throat hurts tonight, so I can't barely talk. And he said this, so what I want you to do, you're now my full partner. I want you to go to the factory. I want you to learn the operations, because then when I die, you can take over. And the son-in-law said, oh, a factory with noise, and I know I'm not into that. I don't want to do that. The guy said, okay, well, I love my daughter very much, so I'll tell you what, why don't you go to the office and learn all the office paperwork and how everything works and the finances. And the guy said, I can't stand being stuck behind a desk all day. I don't want to go into the office. And so the father-in-law gets a little frustrated, and he says, look, I've offered you to go work in the factory. I've offered you to work in the office. But you don't want to do either one, so what do you propose? And the good Jewish son-in-law said, oh, it's very easy. Just buy me out. Was that complicated? Or was it just only funny to me? Thank you. All right. So the Jews, what they're doing, they're charging usury or interest to one another. This violates God's law. What this is, though, is a picture of a banking system. Okay, now we're not going to get into the Rothschilds and the international Jewish banking conspiracy or anything like that tonight. But I do want us to understand how what we see here in the scriptures is relevant to our day. I'm not going to go deep into this because, well, it'd bore all of you, and it would make me more interested because I love economics. I'm a student of the banking system, and I just want to remind you of this. The banking system that exists in the United States and internationally is a banking system that was created to facilitate globalism, dependency of individuals on a centralized power, and to facilitate what we read about in the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel, an international global economic system where the entire world is dependent upon obedience to that system. The United States, for the most part, not exclusively, existed outside of that system for well over 100 years. Now, you can hate or love Andrew Jackson, but one of the things that Andrew Jackson did do was he killed the first central bank. And the central bank is the friend of people that are going to extract usury out of people and take advantage of situations to increase their wealth and to make others dependent upon them. The United States, after that, was independent of a central bank until the fateful year of 1913, which brought in many things, but it brought in two things that are related to our text in Nehemiah chapter 5. Number one, it brought in a central bank, and it brought in, does anybody else know what 1913? We got to have some other conspiratorial libertarians in here. What's that? Not the United Nations. That was after World War II. 1913, what else? Yes? The Federal Reserve, we already mentioned that, and then what else? What was the other thing? 16th Amendments, direct taxation, which was not legal in the United States for the federal government to directly tax people until the passage of the 16th Amendment in 1913. And if you want to thank somebody for all that, you can thank both Teddy Roosevelt, the Republican, and Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, who were both socialist progressives who wanted to have a strong central government to control people. And that's where we got a central bank like we have today. I guess you guys are also excited about this, I can tell. All right, central banks. What does a central bank do? Central bank controls your money. And economics is no more powerful thing than the monetary basis. So it reminds me of a young banker who went to go to a tailor to get his first tailor-made suit. He'd finally made it in banking. He was able to afford it. So he went to the best tailor in town. He got measured for the suit. And a week later, he went in for his first fitting. He put the suit on. It looked fabulous. And he felt that this is a suit that I can do business in. And as he was preening in front of the mirror, he reached his hand to his pockets and found that there was actually no pockets on the pants. And then looked in the coat. There was no pockets in the coat. And he went to the tailor. He said, what's the deal? There's no pockets in this entire suit. And the tailor said, didn't you tell me you were a banker? And the man said, yes, I did. I am a banker. And the tailor said, who ever heard of a banker with his hand in his own pockets? Now, here's the crux of having a central bank controlling the monetary unit, which not exactly what's happening here in Nehemiah 5, but they were exacting usury against God's law. Now take your Bible, go to Leviticus 25, and also having taxation, which is mentioned here in Nehemiah chapter 5. And Nehemiah, by the way, had the right to support himself from the taxes from the Persian king, but he separated himself from that system and forsook that ability, kind of like Paul would do in the New Testament, where he had the power to receive remuneration from the churches, but for a time in his ministry, he set that aside because he felt like the appearance of that was not what he wanted it to be. Now, here's the thing: when you have a central bank, we're going to go quickly now. When you have direct taxation of people, that allows you to redistribute assets based on some sort of a plan. Okay, that's what's happened in the United States. Now, I didn't vote for Mitt Romney. I don't like Mitt Romney. I was ecstatic to see him lose the presidential election, and I wanted him to lose in a way that hurt. Okay? I'll just be completely honest with you. All right? I despise every fiber of his being. That said, when he said that 47% comment in the election, he was actually, that's the one thing in his whole life he said that probably was true. 47% of the American population is substantively dependent on the federal government for its income. That is the tipping point where you really can't do very much about having economic freedom anymore, because you have essentially half of the population terrified that if there was economic freedom, that they would lose what they're counting on in order to help them get through. It allows you to redistribute assets and wealth like what was happening in Nehemiah chapter 5. Okay? And here's what happens when you have a socialistic system. The promise is that a chicken in every pot and a Ford Model T in every driveway. That's the promise. The reality is that wealth is centralized in a very small, politically connected cadre of people, and everybody else gets the same standard of poverty and starvation. And if they don't like it, that's okay, because then the powerful central government will simply murder you. That is the history, documented, proven history of socialism, collectivism, progressivism, communism, whatever you want to call it. That is the uncontrovertible history. You can't steal people's stuff without killing a bunch of them in order to bring in your benevolent socialist paradise on earth. Now look at Leviticus 25 and verse number 39. And if thy brother that dwelleth by thee be waxen poor, and be sold unto thee, thou shalt not compel him to serve as a bondservant, but as a hired servant, and as a sojourner. And he shall be with thee, and shall serve thee unto the year of Jubilee. And then shall he depart from thee, both he and his children with him, and shall return unto his own family, and unto the possession of his father shall he return. For they are my servants, which I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as bondmen. Thou shalt not rule over him with rigor, but thou shalt fear thy God. Both thy bondmen and thy bondsmaids, which thou shalt have, shall be of the heathen which are round about you, and of them shall you buy bondmen and bondmaids. That was God's prescription for if a Jew was to sell himself to alleviate his debt. Debt is incurred when you buy money, when you borrow money. In the book of Exodus, we don't have time to turn there. Exodus chapter 21 will give God's law that it's not legal. Now listen to this. It's not legal for a Jew in God's economy to lend money, to another Jew and to charge interest. Okay? Now think about that for a second. What does that require? Okay, so it's in our system, it would be a complete prohibition. If you couldn't charge interest. Now, the way the Muslims get around that, by the way, because Islam has the same rule. I don't know if you've ever studied Islamic banking. They just charge fees that are commensurate with the principal and the time that it's out. So it's not interest, it's just a fee. Okay? So apparently Ishmael has learned well from Jacob on how to get around the laws of God. But anyway, now think about this. If Andre came to me and said, "Hey, preacher, I need to borrow $100," and I happen to have $100 if I did, and I said, "Okay, Andre, here's the deal. This is not two brothers. This is a business transaction. You have a need, I have the capital, and we're going to agree on terms of repayments with interest." Now, why is it necessary for me to charge interest with? I happen to have 1,000 U.S. cents in my pocket right here in paper form, okay? And somewhere on here it says Federal Reserve note. Why is it important for me to charge interest on a Federal Reserve note? Yeah, because it's not going to be worth as much in the future as it is today because of the central bank system, which is rigged to create an increasing monetary base, our quantitative easing, or they print more money than there is economic activity to ascribe value to that money, which creates inflation. Welcome to 2021. You mean you can't just print trillions of dollars and send it out in the mail as free? I was going to call it Obama money, but it was Trump and now Biden money. Free. Here's thousands and thousands of dollars. Without the value of that money receding? Well, according to Keynes, you can. But according to reality, you can't. And now that's why this stuff is worth far less than it was a couple of minutes ago, right? And so you need interest as a hedge against the deteriorating value of money. Now, if God said this, God said you can't charge interest, what does that tell you about the monetary base in the biblical scheme that God set up? Well, I'll tell you. It's a commodity-based monetary system, which means that when you have essentially a finite commodity basis, increasing productivity, over time, instead of losing value, money acquires value. Okay? Now, we don't have time for all this, but I'll tell you this. In an inflationary system, what is incented is borrowing, debt, and spending. How many of you are going to work your whole life and just stick your money under your mattress and expect it to be there when you retire? You can't, right? Because it's not going to be worth anything, right? In the 1980s, if you were making $20 an hour, you were a zillionaire. Today, you're asking if you want fries with that. Okay? So you can't save money in an inflationary system. It robs people of their ability to save money and to retire unless they're able to get on the top side of the thing and are able to leverage the system for their advantage, which there's ways that, fortunately, we have some remnants of economic freedom in our country. We can do that, and we can hopefully outpace the inflationary aspect of our economy, but you can't just hold and save your money. Okay? You've got to put it at risk in the market. You've got to give it to the banks so they can lend it out at interest. And of course, we're going to talk about the fact that we have a fractional reserve system, which means the bank doesn't even need to have the money that's lending you on deposit. It can just lend you money based on 1/10 of a held deposit, which is not something we want to get into tonight. But our system incentivizes dependency, spending, debt, and everybody running on the hamster wheel their whole life. God's system, where money grows in value over time, encourages saving and wise investments. Now think if it was opposite. Think if in 1980, $100,000, which I'm not sure what it is anymore, was the average median income in Orange County to just have a house and buy groceries and have 2.3 kids or whatever it is. Today, maybe it would be $80,000. Think about if your money actually gained value. Okay, now it would be an entirely different system. Because you know what interest rates would be? They'd be almost infinite. Because the money's going to actually be more valuable in the future than it is today. So you know that it discourages indebtedness, dependency, and it encourages savings. And when you have that system, you have people that are free. When you have this system, you have people that are dependent. I believe, if you study out God's economic laws, that God desired his people to be wise stewards, to be generous, to be free. The system that's beginning in Nehemiah chapter 5 is kind of like Joseph. Now, Joseph did it for the Egyptians, but what was the net result of that? And God doesn't ever say what Joseph did was right, by the way. He just tells us what he did. At the end of that system, there was no more private property in all of Egypt. Right? So it means the entire population of the country were slaves to the government, to the king, to the pharaoh. Okay? So that's what we have here happening in Nehemiah chapter 5. And when you have prices falling, currency rising in value, you don't need the old people of your country to be terrified dependents on the government. And President, I don't know what he really believes, but President Trump realized this when he said we're not touching Social Security and Medicare. I'll give you a little clue. You cannot even begin to address the debt in our country without radically transforming the retirement system. Entitlements are 70% of our budget, and if we continue to tell everybody you can retire at 62 and we'll give you gravy and butter for the rest of your life, then we're done. We're absolutely done. Why does that work? Well, because we keep printing more money than we make. But someday that credit card becomes due, the currency collapses, and now we're in a global system that's just to reinflate the bubble globally. You don't need socialized medicine in a system where money is increasing value. Now, quickly, you guys are listening slow tonight, and I'm sorry. The greatest period of economic expansion in the United States history, despite having a deflationary currency, was between the Civil War and World War I. Now, there was problems, and there was correction, there was recessions, there were depressions in there, but if you normalize it out, the aggregate biggest period where average people got wealthier was that period, and it was a deflationary period. Now, if you go get a degree in economics, they're going to tell you, oh, the robber barons, the robber barons. Well, how about today? Talk about concentrations of wealth, right? But the difference today is that the government controls and owns most of the wealth, where back then, the private sector. And by the way, just as a side point, all those evil robber barons, okay, which whatever, okay, do you know what most of them did with most of their money? They created endowments and universities and libraries. Not all of them, but most of them did. Now, maybe they wouldn't have dedicated their money the way a Baptist would have. But you know, if you go to Pittsburgh, even today, the name Carnegie Mellon, the names Carnegie and Mellon, have huge foundations that are taking care of poor people and educating inner city black children and all this other stuff. Why? Because people who are wealthy, at least back in that system, tended to reinvest in their community, versus today, something different is happening. They're reinvesting in green technology and saving us from global warming. All right. Notice just one thing, just two things. Nehemiah, verse number 6. He heard this and he got very angry. Okay? The Bible says, be ye angry and sin not. So what did he do in the next verse? He consulted with himself. So one quick thing. When you get angry, first of all, being angry is not always wrong. Okay? Jesus got angry. God got angry. Being angry is not wrong. The thing that makes it right or wrong is what is it that's making you angry. If somebody is offending the Holy Trinity of me, myself, and I get angry, well, I'm probably wrong. But if somebody is offending truth and righteousness and I get angry because of that, like Nehemiah did, I'm probably okay with that. But be ye angry and sin not. So notice what Nehemiah did. He consulted with himself, or if you will, he just took some inventory. Okay? So before he rebuked the elders in verse 7, before he started laying everybody out, he just paused. Okay? That might be a good thing. For those of you that have bad tempers and get angry easily, take Nehemiah's advice and before you open your mouth, consult with yourself. Okay? Remember what James 1:19 says, wherefore let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Okay? That's a good formula. Now, the last verse of the chapter. Nehemiah talks about how he has laid himself out, how he has not taken the tax money for himself. He's not taken advantage of the people. And he's feeding 150 rulers. And in verse number 19, he says this, think upon me, my God, for good according to all that I have done for this people. He was expecting payment in eternity. Okay? He was sacrificing, serving, and being sacrificial here. And what he was looking for wasn't a cut of the tax money. He wasn't looking to get graft. He wasn't looking for some sort of crony capitalistic structure where he could use the levers of power to increase his business prospects. He just said, God, you see what I'm doing, how I'm operating in integrity. Some of these people, they don't like that. They're still against me. But, Lord, think upon me. Now, that has all kinds of applications to our life. If you're doing right and you're getting kicked in the teeth because you're doing right, well, keep doing right and make this verse your memory verse. Think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people.